Good afternoon, dear viewers. Today, we are going to consider with you the continuation of the theme of using the large-scale harmony of the universe for a better and correct, quick understanding of how our life is arranged here on Earth. In other words, there the universe will help to sort out our way of life today. This topic, which I am going to develop now, it originated back in the 70s. In 1981, the first article on this topic was published in the journal Knowledge Power, called The View from Afar. If there are people here who have read the magazine, then they should remember. Then, in the 2000th year, the book Large-Scale Harmony of the Universe was published. This is the 4th edition, which was published on the day, look. And this book is fundamental, which allowed me to see how the universe is organized, and that it is arranged harmoniously. Now, I will briefly run through this topic, and then we will take this topic as a basis and try to understand how we live on our planet, how we treat each other, whether we understand correctly or incorrectly what love, hate, justice, and other things are. So, let's start with you, yes. Let's start with the fact that we will present today's topic as a kind of conditionally matrix 3+3, which will consider the interaction of such concepts as instincts, love, competition, justice, natural selection, and supreme expediency in a holistic totality that ensures the safety of the evolution of life. Each of these concepts is a facet that ensures the reliability and safety of the evolution of life. And we are going to see it now. But let's go back to the 81st year first. The Journal of Knowledge of Power, number 8, is a picture showing the harmonies of the universe. Then, in the 2000th year, this scheme appeared, which you see on the right. What does it give? This gives a large-scale approach, makes it possible to position all objects of the universe and our life along the scale axis. The name scale axis may be unusual for you. It is the usual logarithmic axis of decimal logarithms. And I want to say that it doesn't really matter which logarithms we choose. Natural, decimal, binary values don't matter. Why? Because it's about proportions. In other words, I tell everyone that if we take an elephant and a pug, it doesn't matter what we measure the pug with. You can measure with mosses, you can measure with shovels, you can measure with inches, you can measure with centimeters. Whatever we measure, it will still be, let's say, 10 times smaller than an elephant. Therefore, it doesn't matter what measures we choose, centimeters, inches there. It doesn't matter what logarithms we use. But I'm just for convenience, here using decimal logarithms, I immediately dismiss all these questions. Because these questions are often asked. Why did you choose this, not that? I say, it doesn't make any sense to change. You can put anything here. What does it allow? This allows you to arrange all the animals of our biosphere in one picture, from the rotifer, which is less than a millimeter there, to the sequoia, which is more than 100 meters. And what's more, it allows you to place all the objects that we know and science knows in one picture. Here you see the nucleus of an atom, from the nucleus of an atom to an atom, a cell, a person, the nucleus of a star and a metagalaxy. It's all not accidental. It's just here you see the numbers are -13, -8, 12, 7, 17. What does this figure mean? This is the number of zeros in centimeters, which, generally speaking, determine the size of a given object. Well, to people. Why 2? Because 100 centimeters, 2 zeros, okay, right. A star has, let's say, 10 to the 12th degree of a centimeter, 12 zeros, respectively. 10 to the 12th degree of centimeters, so 12 zeros. In other words, it's all very simple. In fact, there is nothing complicated here. So, humanity has lived for a long time in a narrow range of scales. What the human eye has seen. The human eye saw there a small speck of dust 0.2 of a millimeter to the horizon from Olympus. Let's say there are hundreds of kilometers. This range, oddly enough, exactly corresponds to the 10th order. A person saw 5 orders of magnitude more of himself, and 5 orders of magnitude less of himself. And it was a long time before such objects, such devices as a microscope and a telescope began to develop. The microscope allowed us to look into the depths, and the telescope allowed us to look beyond the horizon of our knowledge. And it turned out that our universe is actually arranged very curiously from the point of view of just this depth and height. In depth, we have up to the maximum of the order of -33. This is somewhere there 30 orders of magnitude. And up, it turned out, is also about 30 orders of magnitude from us. And these are all the objects that appeared in the correct dimension. They make up this large-scale hierarchical axis that you see on the left. And you see, since the 1600th year, the microscope, the telescope, all this has expanded our horizons. As the hero of the famous work said, he knows what size the apartment is. Remember, there was such a thing. The work is known. It's the same here. In other words, it all turned out that our world turns out to be very deep and very high. That's what I'm all about, right? Moreover, it turned out that all our achievements, all our gadgets, the microscope, genetics, cell cytology, and other things, everything that we use now are all the fruits of penetration into and up. In other words, satellite TV. We have risen to a larger scale. When we started on microchips, nanometers, we started making chips. In other words, all our achievements of the 20th century are all connected with the development of these layers below, and the layers and horizons above, all without exception. And when all this information flooded, so to speak, into the public consciousness, it blew up the brains of most people. Here is an image of the exploded brain of this information. And because it's almost impossible to put it in one head, there's just so much information accumulated at each of the scale levels that it turned out to be very difficult to assemble it into one picture. I managed to do this, simplifying everything to the limit, of course. It's you who see on the left such a conditional pile of information in the form of Christmas toys that are lying, and on the right, such a beautiful Christmas tree in which everything is in its place. The herringbone has a rod, the rod has a scale axis. Here is an image of what I managed to do. And now, using this very order, we will sort out many very familiar topics for you in a completely unusual way. Well, this is the picture that appeared as a result of such a universal egg. There are exactly 6 levels from maximum to metagalaxy. Each level is divided into 2 sublevels. There is absolutely everything here. You see, there are electrons, atomic nuclei, atoms, a cell, a person in this picture. It was I who made such an eminence on the topic of ancient ideas about the universe, like an egg. In fact, it's just an artistic image, nothing more. And you and I will consider exactly the same picture practically, but it will concern the large-scale system, key to the secret evolution of life. And we are going to consider here the 6 levels. The first level is instincts, the second level is love, the third is justice, the fourth is competition, the fifth level is external natural selection, and the 6th level is the highest expediency. The numbers here mean instincts belong to us, to our body, to us as an organism, right? But the 9 is the size of the biosphere. I see. In other words, here we are considering all levels from you and me to this very biosphere with all the bunnies, and so on, which occupies the highest level for us on the scale axis. Well, at the same time, we will consider 3 worlds. The world is biosynotic, natural. That is, we are animals there anyway, whether we want it or not. We live in this animal world according to all animal laws. Further, the world is social. The social world is not an animal world where we go to work, get paid, learn professions, and so on. And the spiritual world, the angelic world, which, well, about 20% of people are atheists. They do not believe that there is a spiritual world, so we will not tell them anything further about this world. But we will tell only those who believe. And in fact, I have a large part. It is devoted to the material world, so I will touch only a part of the spiritual world. But I can say that the same scheme works for the spiritual world. So, part 1. That's all I said. It was introductory. Fine, 7 minutes. Fast. Now part 1. Love, justice, competition in the animal world. What is it about? Look, if we talk about us as animals, then our instincts act in the first place. If we talk about us as animals that are in some kind of system, then we are primarily in the family. But family is more than our body, so you see, here is a step, here is a couple, love is the next level. Then there is even more. This is the population in the animal world. The population is, let's say, all the hares in one forest. It's clear what a population is, right? I'm just reminding you, because many people forget what the meaning of these terms is, and this is very important. The species is all hares in general on the whole planet. Biosynosis is what lives together in the forest. These are predators, hares, ants, and so on. By mass, by the way, termites can, in my opinion, by mass more than all vertebrates in this. Imagine, that is, these invisible small animal bacteria, and there are trillions of them. They occupy a huge mass. And each biosynosis has from 10,000 species to sometimes hundreds of thousands, millions of species. It seems to us that there are only trees, let's say, and only mosquitoes. In fact, there are a lot of living beings beings there, and they all interact with each other. And finally, we rise above the biocenosis to the biosphere. The biosphere is the totality of all biocenosis. It's clear that this is the taiga, the jungle, and the ocean. It's everything in the world. Yes, it's everything, right. And this is all the size of the system. You see, the further we go, the more the complexity of the system increases. Accordingly, this stepwise ascent determines the ascent along the dimensional axis, which increases the complexity. Complexity does not necessarily increase with size, but in general it turns out that a more complex system has more dimensions in general. I say again, there is an exception to the rule. So the matrix for this animal world looks like this. The first level is animal level instincts. What is the animal's task here? Survive, that is, eat, sleep, and escape from predators. When we rise to the next step, there is love and care in the family, because if there is no family, then there is no procreation. This species is dying out, it's understandable. The next level of the population. Justice and cooperation are already in effect here. What is the fairness of interaction? This distribution, let's say, of the food environment evenly between different individuals. The next level. That's when we move on from good regulators, which most intellectuals like, to evil ones, which a lot of intellectuals do not accept in spirit. They say, these are all nasty regulators, such as competition, selections, of course, these are all wrong things. This is such, I would say, a childish one, in a child's view of the world of an immature consciousness. In fact, all three levels of evil, so-called, I conditionally called them evil. Of course, they also play a role, and without them, life would not have survived. Let's start with intraspecific competition, population genetics. Here in the pictures, you can see that males fight for females, and females also sometimes choose males. Why is this happening? Because if the strongest does not win and leave the strongest offspring, then you understand what will happen to the population, to the species, and so on. He will simply disappear, because the strongest must win in this world. This is natural selection. There is no getting away from it, intraspecific competition. Then there is the next level, the fifth. Predators act at the level of biocenosis. What is biocenosis? These are predators. Let's say wolves, hares, rabbits there, mosquitoes, flies, no matter what. But predatory species are already working here. There are predators in all absolutely varieties of the living world. Here are the plants, here on the left are the animals, and here on the bottom right, what do you think it is? They're swallows one, the other. This is an amoeba swallowing an infusoria. No. Flagellated. They are unicellular. There are predators there too. Here's an amoeba, for example. Yes, it's a predator, right. That is, there are predators everywhere absolutely. And nature has created these predators in such a way that they weed out, call the weak. I'm not going to evaluate whether it's good or bad. I'm just telling you about how nature works, and you decide for yourself. If you don't like nature, then fly to that planet where there are no predators and live there. I think that you are unlikely to find such a planet. But if there is one, then I know, so to speak. Here is an example with predators. For those people who did not believe that predators are a blessing, and there were many such people in America, in Canada, they staged experiments. They exterminated all wolves. Two experiments. One experiment was in the Yellowstonian Nature Reserve, and the other was in Canada. Both experiments ended badly. How did they end? Here is an example. 70 years ago, humans wiped out all the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. You know, this park, where there is a big volcano that is about to explode, and all these parasites of Americans will be covered by one. But there are some of our people who dream about it. Absolutely, it seems to me, the wrong approach. Well, God be with him. Yes, it's just Yellowstone. This led to the uncontrolled decomposition of all mammals, which caused huge damage to the flora park. In the 95th year, the wolves launched the Yellowstone Park. Incredibly, these helped to update the entire ecosystem of the park. This greatly affected the behavior of the horned. The deer began to avoid certain places, and the results. In fact, this is a very interesting experiment. I advise you to get acquainted with it, because it is very important for our understanding. Miraculously, the territories of the park began to revive. The number of trees has grown fivefold. 14 wolves increased the number of trees by 5 times. Barren areas of land have turned into dense forests, where new species of animals have appeared. All 14 wolves did it. The wolves' diet also included coyote meat. This helped to increase the number of mice and rabbits, which in turn led to a park of foxes, weasels, eagles. Bears have returned to the local forests. On a bike, right. And why did they come back? Yes, because there were a lot of delicious, fresh berries growing on trees. The wolves did it all. Here. The strangest thing is that the appearance of wolves even affected the flow of the river. The erosion of the coast has decreased, the beds of winding rivers have straightened and stabilized. Wolves have not just changed the ecosystem, but have changed the entire local terrain. You probably haven't thought about it, but this is how we influence the environment, not from the dark part that we are. In other words, what does this experiment conducted in Wellstone Park say? It was held not only there, it was held in other places. I will not tell you exactly the same stories. He says that wolves are predators, are an integral part of the security system of the evolution of life on the planet. If we get rid of this sector, then we will simply ruin everything else. In other words, this should be clearly understood. So, well, all these external regulators are actually in harmonious interaction. I will tell you more about this at the end. Now I will give two examples. Well, for example, in addition to predators, there is a symbiosis in biocenosis. That is, there are negative vectors, there are positive ones when different species interact with each other. In other words, it is always, everywhere, at all levels, there is a plus and a minus. This is a very long time to consider. I'm going to gallop across Europe now so that you have a complete impression of the integrity of this system at different levels. And then you will already, if you want to read this book, it is displayed here, understand the details. This is actually information available to anyone. So here's the symbiosis. And the symbiosis also works at the level, let's say, they're on the fifth, on external natural selection. And it turns out that there is natural selection in utero. A sand shark is a shark that stimulates natural selection, competitive within itself. That is, she is starving specifically for what? In order for the little eyepieces, and the shark is a viviparous fish, and now they are already there inside her. These little eyepieces live in the shark, and when there is not enough food, they start eating each other inside. That's how nature works. I don't like it, but here they eat each other and are born, in fact, the strongest oculi, which then calmly survive in this aggressive environment. That's how nature works. I repeat again, not mine. I can't evaluate good or bad. I appreciate only telling you how it works. Yes, here are some examples. In fact, there is love at all levels. There are instincts at all levels. There is competition at all levels. I can tell you a little bit about my two granddaughters. One is 4 years old. The other is 8, in my opinion. I forgot there, which is constantly in a state of competition. Now, if you remember the cartoon Masha and the Bear, then when some kind of bear came from the east, remember, yes, Masha and the bear with this constantly took everything away from each other. This is a continuous process, until they fell down and fell asleep. They took each other away all the time. Here is my granddaughter. They are constantly in a state of, well, not all the time, of course. Sometimes they start loving each other, patting each other on the head, bringing cakes. But this rarely happens. Basically, it's competition. This is normal. It is normal when there is competition even in the family for the love of parents, for attention, for the best toy, for everything in the world, everything in everything. Therefore, there is justice everywhere and everything else. But I would like it to be clearly understood that instincts, love, justice, competition, external, natural selection, and higher expediency have a clear attachment to this large-scale hierarchy and dominates at their level. Dominates, you know, right? Love dominates the family. Justice dominates the population. Everything is there, but the dominant still has its own. This is very important to understand. Why? Because when we start thinking about it, we come up with examples that are exactly the opposite of what I'm saying and these. And for some reason, one small example obscures the whole system for people. They say, well, there is love between states. Yes, what kind of external competition is there in the social world? But I say, yes, it occurs sometimes, rarely. Well, it happens. Well, what can you do? Okay, and the last level for the biosphere is the highest expediency. What is it about? The fact is that here you see a picture on the right that shows how the biosphere lived and died out for millions, hundreds of millions of years, 542 million years ago, and to this day there were 6 extinctions, at least 6 extinctions. You see, 60-70%, 70%, 90-96% of all species were dying out. This is a historical fact. The last extinction was 60 million or 62 million years ago, when 75% of all species died. So you think that only dinosaurs died? No. 75% of the species composition was destroyed. This is a terrible thing, a catastrophe, when 95% of the species composition of the biosphere dies out. This is a terrible thing. But imagine that this did not happen, and then what would we get? How would you and I relax on the banks of these rivers when these terrible dinosaurs were splashing there? Presented. So it's a good thing they're extinct. I think everyone will agree that it was the right decision of the country of the biosphere. Moreover, dinosaurs, you see, such a healthy stegosaurus had a brain the size of a walnut. That is, they were imperfect. I see, right. In other words, there is an evolution going on. Evolution goes on until all this development leads to a dead end, and then the whole system collapses indiscriminately. There is love there is justice there, it doesn't matter anymore. Everything is falling apart. The reset button is pressed, and everything is erased. This is generally a terrible thing, by and large, but you and I know that our souls live forever. So it doesn't matter what we are wearing a dinosaur skin, or, so to speak, a human body. Isn't that right? Most of those present here believe that our souls are transmigrating, and for us, all these updates, these material ones, they are not so important. The New Testament says, so to speak, take care of your soul first of all, right? So it's spelled right. That's why even scientists like Charles Darwin, well known to everyone, wrote, it is not the strongest who survive, but the most susceptible to change. This is very relevant today. The changes that are being rolled at us now, we need to accept them, understand them, and adapt to them. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in the role of the dinosaurs of the dead. Well, the final scheme for the animal world. I stayed on the animal world for a long time. Why? Because it is simple, clear, accessible, and not so offensive. We are not so offended that there are predators among animals, as it is insulting that there are predators among us humans. And that's a shame. Now we are going to move on to this, so I will prepare for this transition for a long time. Here is the final scheme. It is also reflected in the book. So, the conclusion is that all 6 regulators of evolution are needed: love, instinct, justice, and fair competition. Natural selection, the highest expediency. None of them can be excluded without ruining life on the planet. This is the main conclusion. You see, that all of them are needed, none of them, and they are all in their place, and all work for the common good, the absolute good of evolution. There you go. By today's lecture, I suddenly thought that these 6 levels that I am promoting, they somehow have their roots in the system of hexagrams known to you all for sure. The Chinese have a kind of Bible called the Canon of Changes, the Book of Changes. They study their lives according to this book. They pray for this book. They read this book there. For them, it is like the most important book. From China, 1.5 billion people read this book instead of the Old Testament. And here on the right is the quintessence of this book. I see, right. As we have a trinity there are 3 levels here, these 3 grams here. They are repeated twice, and it turns out 6 levels. Here is this 6-level hierarchy of the canon of changes. It is the same as in my scheme. I didn't specifically adjust it to this, believe me. I just realized by today that there is a roll call going on. I haven't fully comprehended it yet, but to make it clear that these 6 levels exist in other systems as well. So, part 2. Love is justice to competition for a social person. Here we will face very difficult conclusions that not everyone will accept, but I will still have to follow logic. Not acceptance or rejection. It's the same here. We are as a social person, not an animal as a social person. Okay, right. We occupy some kind of cell in society. Let's say we are specialists, a librarian, for example, there, an engineer, a designer, an official, no matter who. This is a unit. We form a family. This is the social unit of society, as our famous one said. Some kind of family is the primary, simplest cell of society. Right. Then we go to work. To work, relatively speaking, the workshop. We come to some kind of collective. We are in this collective. This is already more. Then we, having made these products, go out on our products. Where to? To the market. The market is already a lot of workshops of different manufacturers, the ratio. Then we get into the country. Mentally, we get into the country. There are a lot of personalities, a lot of families, a lot of collectives, a lot of things there. This is essentially an analog of biocenosis. And all of humanity is an analog of the biosphere. I see, right? I have highlighted the same 6 levels. At the level of social instinct, we are fighting for survival, collecting mushrooms and earning a salary, fighting for our protection with all sorts of criminals, enemies, wild animals. That is, our instincts must work. If our instincts don't work, then we die quickly. I see, right? There's not even anything to explain. Then, in order to prolong the mouth, we must definitely have a family. Why? Because without a family, the mouth does not last. We have big, huge problems with our family right now. But I can say that in India, for example, everything is fine with families there. And in China, it is also fine with families. And in the Arab world, it is fine with families. Well, there are problems in Russia, big problems with the family. But in fact, without a family, society does not renew itself. Because children have grown up normally, they have to live in some kind of cell, in this cell of love, care. And for this, a family is needed. Without this cell, there is no family, and there is no extension of the genus either. We climb higher, there we go to work in the so-called workshop. It's not love. It's not instincts that are at work here. Justice is at work here. Well, for example, one worker did 100 times, well, there is twice as much as a neighbor worker. He gets twice as much salary if he is on piecework. I see, right. Is that fair? Fair enough. Another worker, who made half as much detail, comes to the head of the shop and says, it's not fair. I have a big family. I have 30, so to speak, grandchildren there, for example. Here I have a disabled wife. Why was I paid half as much? It's not fair. He says, no, it's fair. Why? Because why should I pay you the same as your friend standing next to me? You have the same business. The more you have done, the more you get. This is justice. We rise higher. Yes, that's justice in the New Testament. The parable of the talents. For some reason, many people remember only one parable from the New Testament, their turn your left cheek. If you were hit on the right cheek, or love your neighbor as yourself. Well, the maximum that is usually remembered and mentioned. And there are many parables, many. And that's where I'm not going to list everything, but one of the parables about talents sounds like this. Here I will not count it to you, you can read it yourself. The point is that the master, that is, God, left his servants and his servants, 3 of his less, and distributed talents to each. There are 5 talents for one, 2 for another, 1 for another. He left talents for everyone according to their strength and left them alone. While he was away, everyone used their talents, and talents at that time were a lot of money, like $1 million. He gave one 5 million, another 2 million, the third 1 million, for example, relatively speaking. A parable is a convention. So he came back, and one of them took 5 talents, multiplied them, made 50 talents. The other took 2 talents, made 5 talents there. And the third took one of his talents, this one, and in order not to lose it, he dug a hole, buried it, closed it there, and when the owner came, he dug it out and brought it. Here he acted as if it were right, because he did not lose anything, did not destroy, did not take risks. What is the conclusion? The Lord, that is, the Lord said to him in response, a crafty paw, a slave and lazy, to someone who buried his talent, and did nothing. You should have given the silver to my merchants, and when I came, I would have received mine with a profit. But this is conditional. Then there was no profit in any other way, right? Therefore, take a talent from him, and give to him who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given to multiply. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Throw an unfit slave into the outer darkness. There will be a cloak and gnashing of teeth. That's where the love of Christ is here. Where do you put your left cheek under your right hand there, right? Where is it all? These are all quotes from the New Testament. Read carefully. Everything is written there. There is a speech about what justice is. I see, right. In other words, everything is written, we just don't see it. And rising higher in the social world, we get into the so-called market. In other words, each of us has certain talents, which he invests and receives the product. By bringing this product to society, we want something to be repaid for this product. That is, if I made, let's say, some kind of car, then I want to sell it more expensive. If I have written a book, then I want it to be published in 1 million copies, for example. And we are entering into competition with other car manufacturers in this market. Well, the most primitive example of a market is a vegetable and fruit market. There are sellers in the market there. Each seller puts out his goods, his vegetables, his fruits, for example. Yes, here you are walking through the market, and you see the counters. On the counter, you see the appearance of these same vegetables and fruits. Then you look up, you see a pretty woman, not a pretty woman, a young woman, you see an old woman. Whoever you see, in any case, you will not choose according to the external view of these people, but you will choose according to the view of this product, and you will choose according to the price. That is, in the market, by and large, it does not matter who sells. Let's say there is a mother with many children, or a single mother, it doesn't matter to you. Whether she fairly sought this harvest there or unfairly, it doesn't matter either. You're not going to ask and find out. Imagine that you are in the market. In the market, only the competitive attitude of this product is crucial for you. Right, right. I mean, what am I talking about? Because interspecific competition in the market plays the same role in the social world as it plays in the animal world. And finally, we rise to a layer in which most people are not acceptable. This is called the natural selection of society into social predators. Social predators are not those predators that kill people and then cook a barbecue out of them. No. These are the people who kill social systems that have outlived their weak social systems, including raiders. And that's where evolution is. The combine destroyed almost all the reapers. Why get married when there is a combine harvester? The cars destroyed all the cabs. This is, so to speak, natural selection in society. There are predatory raiders like that, you know, yes. A very nice raider was played by this actor, Richard Gere. Yes, I forgot him. Julie Robertson. Well, remember, this is a pretty movie, right? He's such a repentant raider then at the end. But there are few raiders who repent. In fact, most of them come, see the weak enterprise, they finish it off, destroy it, and divide it into happiness, and that's it. This is normal, because if your company is weak, if it interferes with someone in the market, and you can't protect him, then you have to understand one way or another, there are wolves that will eat you. It is necessary to have a powerful defense against these social wolves. And the highest expediency, the most difficult moment, which a lot of people don't like, but it still exists. Here we have an example. The death of Pompeii, the death of the Titanic, and the famous apocalypse, right? Pompeii is a beautiful city by the sea, right? People lived there, competed with each other, loved each other, saved their lives, some kind of justice, talked. And suddenly, bang. And all of this was covered with ashes. Absolutely everyone, without exception. And Pompeii was gone. Is that fair? Hardly. For love. No way, no way. But it happened. The same thing with the Titanic. Were the passengers of the Titanic to blame for the sinking of the Titanic? No, of course not. And drowned there? Well, far from the worst people, let's say so, for example. For what? The question is, yes. And the most striking example is the apocalypse, which John the theologian prophesies to us, so to speak, and about which you can now hear a lot of information in the press. Why? Because we are, as it were, standing on the edge of this apocalypse, the destruction of all mankind. There is a battle there, the last battle of good with evil, when this will come and destroy everything here that was built by people on earth. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The question is. Well, I say again, it's not for me to judge this world, which is so arranged, it's so arranged. Just as the biosphere in the time of the dinosaur was beautiful in its own way, it was destroyed. I think the social world is also exposed from time to time. The button cuts, renewal, and a new social world appears, and there is nothing to be done. We must remember that we live forever. Our souls live forever, and all these social constructions that are being built on Earth are not the most important thing in our life. Only this saves us from these depressing thoughts about the apocalypse, which are supposedly coming at us. I don't know if it's coming or not, but one way or another, there are conversations about it. The final scheme for a social person, the same levels, man's survival instinct, family, mouth the instinct of procreation, workshop justice, and so on. In other words, everything is the same, nothing changes completely. The third part is the love of justice and competition for a spiritual person. This topic is very complex. It is well considered in the book. I'm skipping it now. Whoever wants to, he will read the book and look at exactly the same principles. Only there is an instinct for preserving the soul, love for neighbors in spirit, and not for neighbors in body. That is, all the same laws in fact. Read the book. If you are interested, you will see everything there. And exactly the same scheme. The spiritual population is justice according to the sum of incarnations. After all, there is such justice. The struggle for a place under the sun in the social spiritual field also exists, divine selection also exists, and divine expediency also exists. If you approach all these questions philosophically, you will understand it all. If your own initiative is not enough, you can read the ready-made answers in my book. There I more or less figured it out. I can't say I figured it out. More or less, I would say, I gave some hints. And the fourth part, love, justice, competition in the social world. The social world, in this case, we are talking about some societies, as in some beings. The fact is that for quite a long time, there have been disputes about what nationalism is. How does secessionism, fascism, national mentality, patriotism differ from Nazism? This is such a mess of concepts that I tried to understand. And the first samples of the pen, this is the first sample of the pen you see on the screen, this is what I managed to understand. In fact, this does not mean that I have fully figured it out. It's just such a working scheme. Let's just look at it, criticize it, try to understand it. Instinct is a national mentality. It's something that you can't get rid of. The Russian has his own mental views on life. The Hindu has his own. The Arab has his own. It's at this level. Love is patriotism. Patriotism is love for the motherland, for the Russian, for the German homeland, for the American homeland, for any homeland. This is patriotism. Justice. Is justice fair? Yes, the letter is missing, yes. You see, yes, justice, so it didn't work out for me here. But in fact, justice, it seems to operate at the unlevel. That's where they are trying to establish some kind of justice. Just as there is no justice in the family, as there is no justice in the animal world, there is no justice in the social world. So there is no justice in the un. But they are trying, at least they are trying to achieve some kind of justice. Trying is not torture. As I said, remember, yes, this joke. Vladimir Mayakovsky was told by Stalin, and you try. An attempt is not a joke. Am I right, Comrade Beria? Remember. So they're trying here too. Competition. This is where nationalism turns out. What is nationalism? Nationalism is not Nazism. Nationalism is when I love my homeland Russia and say, Russia is the best country in the world. I am ready to give my soul to it and everything else, etc. I praise her. I like all her qualities. I think that the Russians are the best. Let's say they will win there in the end. And let's say there is a German there. He believes that no, the Germans are the smartest, the best, the most correct. And he beats his chest and says, no, the Germans are the best. These two collisions are the competition. The competition of national characteristics, what I call nationalism. Maybe I'm wrong. This is where the very complex nuances went. Predators are Nazism, Zionism, fascism. This brought to predatory nationalism, brought to the state of a predator, when Nazism was inherent in whom? The Germans. And who was fascism inherent in? Europeans. Why? Because fascism is a common property of all Europeans without exception. In other words, when they have a lack of resources, when they begin to get into difficult situations, these predatory tendencies wake up in them, and they all unite together and try to rob Russia, for example. This is predatory. This is fascism in its purest form. He has just woken up. As you know, herpes wakes up in a person with a cold, so fascism is inherent in all of Europe. Russians also have something similar. Great Russian chauvinism, I do not know, and so on. In other words, this does not mean that Europe is the only one sick, so to speak. No, it is certainly inherent in all nations when difficult moments come. And there is a desire to plunder and behave predationally on the nation, right? Well, Zionism is the same. A beautiful nation of Jews, it can bring itself to the state of Zionism when it wants to plunder, let's say, all other nations. In other words, this property is predatory. It is present in all absolutely nations. Well, and the highest expediency, they won't talk about it, because it's still a raw idea. The last part is love, justice, competition for the culture of civilizations. This is the weakest part I have worked out. It has only recently popped up in my mind, so I am putting it out for general discussion. I kept trying to understand why justice is so important for Russians. And Russians don't like competition. Competition for Russians is generally simple, for the most part. I'm not talking about everyone. Many Russians do not accept competition, but they love justice. I tried to divide some nations according to these characteristics, but this scheme turned out to be. Instincts are inherent in wild tribes. Love dominates India. Some movies are still about love, right? Justice, it is inherent primarily in Russia. Russia, it is ready to do everything there for justice. Intraspecific competition is fairly inherent in the West. The West is built on competition. And take the competition out of the Western world, and the Western world will disappear. It will lose all its peculiarity. And justice cannot be taken away from us, then we will lose our national characteristics. Natural selection predators, TNCs, transnational corporations. This is a predatory layer that absolutely has someone to exploit, rob, they are ready to devour everyone. Just to fill their belly with super profits, right? Well, and the highest expediency, three big questions. A little bit of Russia. Why is justice so important for us? This topic is huge. I'll only touch with two strokes like this, right? Dostoevsky wrote, "The highest and most striking characteristic feature of our people is a sense of justice and a thirst for it." Dostoevsky was a genius. He felt very well the peculiarities of life. Yes, but the competition is not. There was such a researcher, Gleb Uspensky, who wrote a famous book called The Power of the Earth. I advise everyone to read it. Why? Because this book was Vladimirovich Lenin's desk book, by the way. He conceived his revolution based on this book, by the way. The Russian mentality is very well dissected there. And so he lived for many years in the village, as a Western-minded intellectual, observing the life of the peasants. And he described this life very interestingly, and characterized it very interestingly. It's worth reading. Honestly, it's worth it. I really enjoyed this book, didn't I? And here is one of the moments. Uspensky complains that together with the world, that is, the whole village, the peasants could not solve simple problems. For the sake of increasing collective income, he gives an example there. That is, it seemed that it was necessary to gather in order to increase income. They couldn't. That's all they couldn't do. Here, at least crack it, at least scratch a stake on your head. He gives examples of how nothing works out. And at the same time, he writes the most, in my opinion, trivial, worthless worldly affairs like a worldly suburb, or a division of beef from the ground, absorb a lot of public attention. Here they measure 20 times what has been measured out for a long time. They measure it with ropes, and fathoms, and stakes, and shovels, so that the toe will certainly fall into the heel. Why? Because it is important that the land that they have is fairly distributed. Justice comes first, competition and profit somewhere beyond the horizons, are of no interest to anyone in Russian culture at all. This is what I am, once again returning to this scheme, all the qualities that I have considered in all areas. They are somehow interconnected, intertwined, mutually filled. It cannot be said that at any of these levels of consistency, at least some of this is missing. Everything is there, but the dominant must be clearly understood. There's justice in the shop. There's nothing to cry about, that you have small children there. You have to work on the shop floor. No one cares how many children you have. I see, right? And when you fall naturally under the predatory gaze, remember that there is only no justice, and it is useless. Like a lamb asking for mercy, so to speak, of a wolf, because you are to blame only for the fact that he wants to eat. I see, right? So run, save yourself, defend yourself. In other words, it should be clearly understood that all these operating parameters, functionals, I hope that I have given you enough examples to make you understand that none of these functions can be removed, so as not to kill the whole nature, not to destroy the entire biosphere, not to destroy all of humanity. That is, all this is necessary. It's hard to accept. I imagine how difficult it will be for people to accept the need for ovaries of some kind. You know, yes, this is natural selection. Competition, all this is repugnant to our character, but it still does not change anything in the life around us. To come not to come, it still needs to be accepted. Thank you for your attention. Here are these 2 books in which you can find more detailed answers to these questions. I'm done. I hope I invested. Yes, 44 minutes. You said in the last lecture that you figured out the time. So what is time, and is it possible